So I think we're going to go ahead and get started today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 5th webinar for those invited to submit final applications to CLEAR's Digitizing Hidden Special Collections and Archives, Amplifying Unheard Voices program this year. I'm Sharon Burney, and I'm a member of the CLEAR Grants team, and I'll be starting things off today. My fellow program officers, Becca Kwan and Joy Banks, and our colleagues, Allison Pope and Diane Ramirez, are here also to help us in supporting the meeting. We're going to go through just a couple of reminders about using Zoom during this session. Live transcript is being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, I want you to click the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. You may notice that this is a regular Zoom meeting space instead of the webinar space. You have control of your own microphones and video, so please be mindful and ensure you're muted if you aren't speaking. We know sitting on a Zoom camera in Zoom can be a bit exhausting, so feel free to turn that off during the presentation. And at times, you may be invited to unmute or pop on video for a discussion or Q&A. You're also welcome to use chat throughout the presentation. To open the chat box, you can hover over your mouse towards the bottom of the screen and open it manually. The chat defaults to send a message to everyone, but you may also message individuals directly. This session is being recorded. The slides, the Q&A, the recording, and transcript will be made available on the Apply for an Award page of our website by the end of the week. If you've missed any of the sessions in our series, they're all available in the same place. I'm going to turn it over to Joy.
Our team would like to acknowledge that as residents of the United States, we are speaking to you from unceded land of many Indigenous peoples. Those of us working at CLEAR are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their homelands and ask you to join us in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. As we share a few slides and introduce our guest speakers, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat too, and to share a land acknowledgement for the area where you live or work if you'd like. May our shared acknowledgement and the program we're speaking about today demonstrate CLEAR's commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. So before we hand things over to our hosts for this session, we wanted to share the components of the application where you'll be asked to provide details about the things that we will be covering today so that you can keep them in mind and sort of map the conversations to your hidden collections proposal. You may recall that we started talking about the outcomes task in our last session. That focused on digitization specifically. But today we're talking about all of the other outcomes that you can discuss in this section. Your response here is your opportunity to really share any strategies, events, or other activities that you have planned, and be sure to demonstrate how these outcomes link to specific audiences.
In the capacity section, you'll be asked to speak to the capacities and strengths of all of those involved in the project work. This is your space to celebrate your team, to emphasize their current strengths and areas of growth that may be possible through this project. This will address both those who may already be at your organization and those you hope to bring in through this project. Consider especially how you're building a team that reflects the broad representation of and authentic partnerships with communities. The narrative portion of this task should also touch on any past work your organization has done that shows its ongoing commitment to the work. Also within this task are several required uploads that should be used to support your narrative, showing the commitment of your organization, any collaborators, the experience of existing or future staff, and your board. Use these uploads to help illustrate to our review panel how your own values and organizational structure align with the values and funding priorities of the program.
The need for support task includes a narrative section and several uploads. Related to today's topic, you'll want to be sure that you're requesting the funding you need to complete the project you have planned with the people you would like to include. Reviewers will be looking for evidence that the wages and benefits you will offer reflect equitable rates of pay for your area, that community members engaged with the project are appropriately compensated, whatever that looks like for your community, and that the partnerships you are fostering in the project show equitable and authentic distribution of project resources. This task includes the upload for both the budget detail spreadsheet, which must be submitted on CLEAR's budget detail template, and the budget narrative, which may be submitted on the optional template.
So as we always do at these sessions, we're going to share a quick optional poll to gauge how you're feeling about today's topic of staffing, budget, and outcomes. And you should be able to answer that anonymously, and we'll leave it up for a minute or so. All right, I'm seeing somewhat prepared, so that's good. There will also be a more detailed post-session survey, and we'll share the link to that in the chat and encourage you to open it up so you can submit it when the session ends. So now we'd like to introduce today's speakers. The host for the presentation portion of today's session is Stacy Williams. Stacy is Division Chief for Archives and Special Collections at Chicago Public Library. She has participated in grant writing on multiple CLEAR proposals, served as a peer reviewer for NEH and IMLS funding, and was a co-investigator on the Collective Responsibility Project and Forum, which created guidelines for fair and equitable labor and pay for digital project labor in GLAM professions. We'll hand things over to her in about 15 minutes. And ahead of that, we wanted to spend a bit of time today at the last of these sessions with guest speakers by, talking to someone who can share insights and reflections from the other side of this process, who has contributed to funding decisions. And we could not think of anyone we'd like to have invited more. So we're excited to introduce Dr. Kim Gallen. Dr. Gallen is a visiting associate professor of history of medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and founder and executive director at COVID Black, which is a project that works at the intersection of health data, information, the humanities, race, and social justice. Dr. Gallen was a member of the Hidden Collections Review Panel from 2017 to 2020, and her work on and off the panel have helped to shape our thinking over the past few years as we've moved towards the program's new core values and thematic focus. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides for a bit and we will chat with Dr. Gallen and with Stacy.
Okay. Thank you so much, Becca, and good afternoon, everyone. It is so great to see all of you. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Welcome, Dr. Gallen, and thank you so much for also taking part in this panel. Looking very forward to hearing your perspective today. We wanted to start out with some questions for you that might help provide a little perspective and set the groundwork for today's session.
Great.
So jumping right in here, first question for you. So we tend to advise applicants to communicate the inspiring aspects of their project to reviewers. What are some aspects of a proposal, in your opinion, as a reviewer, that have always excited or inspired you when you saw them in an application?
Thank you for that question, Stacy. But first I want to say, and before I answer, thank you to Clear for allowing me or inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I have to say that generally when I get an email from Becca or someone else on Clear, I try to answer it within a couple of days. So it was really delightful to get an email from her inviting me to be a part of this discussion on this side of it. As someone who's been part of the reviewer side for now 3 going on 4 years, it was refreshing to be able to talk to people who are thinking or preparing to apply for a grant, and to give my perspective on the process and my interaction with other applications. So Stacy, just to directly answer your question, I think it's important for people to know that I am a professor. I am full-time at Purdue, but this year I'm at Hopkins. But before I was a professor, I spent some years as a librarian working with collections. So I'm professionally trained as a librarian, have an MS in library information science from Drexel from a long time ago, but I think once a librarian, always a librarian. So I always appreciate when librarians welcome me back into the fold. So when I do look at these applicants, I bring that perspective as a person that's worked in library information and science. And I think one of the most exciting things and that I'm often looking for is how people are engaging with this idea of hidden, right? So on some level, hidden is the literal, people can't access it, right? And there's a lot of value in talking about hidden in a very literal way. We have this collection somewhere in our basement or somewhere in the recesses of our institution, and it needs to be digitized. It has some value, has significant value. But some of the most powerful applications I've seen have talked about, yes, it's literally hidden, but it's also hidden because of the implications of power and identity, and the ways that there are some ways that we give lots of resources and privilege some knowledge and information that represents certain privileged communities. And there's others that there are things that are hidden out of necessity, but also hidden because no one's paid attention to them. So I always appreciate when people talk about the nature of a hidden collection and how they are thinking about what it means to be hidden. And this is not to go into a really philosophical point of view, but just to show that people have spent some time thinking about what it means to have a hidden collection, and in doing so, what it would mean to digitize that. So if I could just extend that a little bit more, Stacy, if that's okay. I think when you think critically about hidden, it requires you to think really critically about what the digitization of these collections could mean for a broader public and a broader understanding of any set of issues that this collection might engage in, right? And so when I am sitting in the room with other fellow reviewers and we are exchanging thoughts and ideas about these applications, we are looking for people to think expansively about the collection and how its availability can transform what we know about a given topic, transforming understandings, giving us different ways to look at things. So I think bring a really set of critical understanding to notions of hidden, and then using that to then think about the ways that this digitization could be transformative is really what excites me and makes for a powerful application.
Thank you so very much for that, Dr. Gowan. I really like your comments about thinking expansively about what it means to think about hidden. I think a really great example of this that we're starting to look at now as we've kind of standardized what's happening in our shop at CPL is this idea that, in the past, Black collections, if perhaps they have been a part of hidden collections projects, there may have been incidences of unintended precarity that disproportionately fell on archivists of color who were disproportionately perhaps hired into those roles for hidden collections. So thinking expansively about what it means to say, if you value, actually having access to Black histories, you have to actually value the labor that makes Black histories discoverable. So being able to advocate in that way and say this is why it's actually really important to place a high value on the work, because loss and the ways that things become hidden, that also happens through precarity. It happens through, positions that are turning over all the time, and through temporary positions where folks are walking out of the door with really important knowledge about collections. So thinking it through, yes, I love that idea of expansion. Absolutely, thank you.
And just to add to that, I just have to add one more thing. There are some times where people make conscious choices to hide things, right? For the safety measures, and when I say safety measures, I don't necessarily mean the physical safety, but often underrepresented communities of color, communities of gender and sexualities have been marginalized, are protecting, or may see themselves in a way of protecting collections from public view, because they may disclose information that they may not readily want available, or protecting and trying to hold on to history, trying to maintain control over history. And so what we often see, and I hope I'm not preempting you, Stacey, but we also see are institutions with very, very good intentions that are well positioned, established institutions very much wanting to work with community organizations around some of these projects, but not really thinking through the politics of what that relationship could be, right? And how in some instances, there's real intentionality of keeping things even as precarious and as vulnerable as it may make the collection, but not making those collections really readily available because the trust and the relationship hasn't been developed.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for adding that point. I think it's a really important aspect to consider about what, when you're looking at what makes something inspirational, intention versus ability to apply and reality. That does actually bring me to the next question. So once you've seen this inspiring thing, an application of hidden that really breaks out of the mold, what components would convince you or have convinced you in the past that a project would be successful? And this might be if it's, letters of support, or very specific selected materials, or, individuals involved in projects, just to give some examples.
Thank you for that. So I'll say what I don't like to see before I can build up to what is really powerful. And I don't mean to start off with a negative, but sometimes it is troubling to see institutions that we ask applicants to speak to a couple of things that I think are really important. All of them are important, but some that really strike me as particularly important. Partnering, the collaborations, right? But also speaking to issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And some of the things that trouble me are the ways that people see that question as a sort of drop in XYZ people of color, XYZ people of marginal status. And so strong applications, really, things that really strike me. Yes, I want to see applications that really state the value of this collection. And that's not a hard sell with me. I want to digitize everything if I could, right? So, but clearly there are some priorities there. But the applications that really, really, really hit me, and I really take notice of, when it's been clear that there has been a very thoughtful relationship and a development, not only with a collaborating organization, but with the material itself. So, I'm an African-Americanist, I teach African history. And so, my point of view is coming from this standpoint. So I'll use, African-American history as an example. There are many, I think, institutions that see the inherent value of digitizing African-American text, but it's clear that they don't know the material, that they're not able to really fully engage in the communities that could benefit from this material, both within the academy and outside of the academy. And so it's not enough to say that part of our dissemination plan is going to be to build a website and, you know, get some stuff on social media. That's baseline. We'd like for institutions to be creative. You know, what are the ways that this can build new communities that of knowledge around this? What is the way that this new collection may connect communities to people that are in the academy, right? How does this push knowledge forward, but how does this also push relationships? What are the ways that these texts might open up, you know, digitization and the digital humanities to new scholars that have been historically not brought into the digital humanities or into technology or into this particular text? What are the ways that these texts can build from there? Those are the key elements that, again, I'm speaking for myself, but I've been doing this enough years to know that those also excite other members of the panel as we think about, you know, this is a digitization project, but CLEAR has been very, has emphasized that in digitization, this is about developing a much more broader set of understandings and knowledge about the collections, but also about relationships and communities.
Thank you so much for that. A lot of really, really great points there that I would say and agree, I think are really important as you're thinking through what components are really useful. Absolutely. I think I have also seen as well a shift with funders where, yes, the relationships that are being described in your narrative, they need to be very, very clear about like it's a presumed benefit to a larger institution, especially perhaps like an academic institution or a large cultural heritage institution. It's presumed there is a benefit to that space. They usually tend to be the fiscal agents on projects. So is there a possibility to really create and think through intentionally an equitable design where perhaps the community partner has equal or maybe even more of an administrative share on a project? It doesn't just have to be a university leading a collecting effort all the time. A lot of different options there. Last question for you as we jump in here. What outcomes did you hope to see on proposals that really did catch your interest? And on the flip side, were there any that you didn't want to see that perhaps people should not be looking to replicate or make a part of their process?
Yeah. These are great questions. They're really getting me to think even more critically about something that I take very seriously. One of the reasons I keep coming back, and then up until last year, was really about the community. I think CLEAR of reviewers, you know, they have such a great process of building within this. On the reviewer side of community, we weren't able to meet because of COVID. So that aside, in terms of those relationships that I think CLEAR has been instrumental in helping me cultivate, in terms of outcomes of these projects, I'm always hoping for again, baseline. I want to talk about baseline and then more sort of more transformative things. On baseline, I want to see hidden collections, things that are not able to be accessible to people, made available, right? That's a basic outcome. And I'll just share with you, and I don't know who the funder is, but it's something that, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to put in the chat just so people can see this news. I am a person that deals a lot with the Black press. I wrote a book about the Black press, and I've long written about, give me one second. I've long written about archives, Black press archives, and how they are vulnerable because people often don't have the money to digitize them and make them accessible. And the Afro just got over a $500,000 grant to digitize their collections. Some of you probably already know that. And so one of the outcomes, and so I'm going to connect this here. So baseline, making it available, but one of the outcomes is giving smaller organizations that don't necessarily always have the resources, the processes, the tools to be able to engage in other digitization projects, right? So yes, I want to see collections available, but what are the ways that this can transform an institution or organization so that it sets them up to have new modes of digitization, new practices of how they think about archiving text, new ways that they are disseminating and marketing their text to new communities. That's the true transformation that I think CLEAR offers any one institution or organization. Yes, we have now people can come and research this, but how does this change the institution or organization's relationship to their collections? So down the road, when there's another hidden collection or another partnership, this becomes a model, whether CLEAR funded or not, it becomes a model for thinking about the ways that text and collections are made accessible. What I don't want to see is I don't want to see we got the money and run sort of approach. Yeah, we digitize this stuff. Now, we can promote it and let's go on to the next project. I want to like a sustainability, a thorough plan of we've digitized this. Now, how do we create relationships, new partnerships, new tools, and new resources? I've long been concerned that in the rush to digitize things that we haven't thought thoroughly about what we're going to do with those digitized materials or how we make them sustainable and accessible. And I think CLEAR is one of the organizations, it's one of the reasons why I continue to be affiliated with them, that has thought through digitization and is requiring applicants to think about the next steps.
Thank you so much for that. That is fantastic, and I think a really, really good lead into some of the topics that we are going to discuss later on during this session. Sustainability. Yes, we say it a lot, but what does that really mean? These ideas of sustainability and maintenance, and not just on the project side, but yes, also on the people side is, are the conditions that we're creating, is that sustainable long-term for getting work done in the profession over a long period of time? Do these grant applications include new models for thinking about how to equitably distribute the work and get things done? So that was such a perfect note, I think, to leave us on to move into this next section. So I think from here, and I wasn't sure if there were any questions in the chat, Becca, is this like a natural stopping point into which we would be asking questions? I'm also happy to hold until the end.
Yeah, if anyone has questions for Kim, we could probably take one or two. So please leave them in the chat.
I'll just say one more thing. I just want to wish everyone luck. Grant applications are so arduous and they take up so much time. And so I just want to, first of all, let you know that I understand. I've definitely been on the other side in terms of the grant application process. And no matter what the outcome is, and I've always sort of walked into it in this situation, there's a sort of value in sort of crafting these applications. And the one thing, again, I know people are gonna like, did they pay her to say all of this, like in the sort of promoted type of way? But it is truly unique that CLEAR gives this type of substantive feedback that they give to applicants. I've applied to a lot of grants. I've gotten some and probably have gotten as many as I'd like. And there's only been a couple of them that offer the type of feedback that CLEAR offers, giving you some insight to, where the strengths of the application are and where, there could be some improvement. And so I think if there's any grant program to spend the time and energy working on, it's CLEAR, because no matter what, you're going to come away with some valuable knowledge about what makes a strong application. So that's my final thought.
Thank you so much, Kim. It looks like we have a more specific question, I think, about how much additional information, embedded links, is too much when you're trying to give background and context and be super explicit. So yeah, that's a good question. Maybe Kim, you've seen the length of the full application. How much do you really dig in?
Yeah, I'm glad for that question. I actually, again, and I think I feel fairly confident speaking for many of the reviewers who I, have been serving with for the last few years. We do look at those links, right? We do look at the context. It's always hard to quantify this in terms of like when you're talking about background and context to try to contextualize the collection and what its value is and what's its significance. So I don't want to get into a number, but what I will say is be strategic when you pick the context, right? Make sure the context and the additional information that you are selecting works for you and is integrated into the overall narrative that you are writing. Things that are kind of showcasey, or things that may seem like, wow, this is a really cool image or a really cool document, but isn't necessarily connected to the narrative and how you're trying to convey the significance of the project or the collection may not work for you. So you want to pick the context and background and links, sample documents or text that work for you. Make it work for you. Oh, that's a good question. How difficult do you think it is when a non-institution applicant is sort of going up against applicants with much more resources? How can we focus on our strengths? That's a great question. Becca, I hope I'm not being too forward when I say this. As a reviewer, I can say as much as I can that when we look at the applicants, we are not measuring the amount of resources that a person has, right? That we come to this thinking, about the applicants and their ability to tell a story. And on some level, Jamelia, or I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, there's a material reality that there are some institutions that are just going to have resources, right? I went from a small liberal arts college where there was one person that helped all the faculty with the grant applications, one person, to Purdue, where they have a whole team of people just for people in the College of Liberal Arts, right? So I would be lying to you if I said that all institutions are placed equitably when it comes to teams that can help put these applications together. But when it gets in front of CLEAR, I think CLEAR is really cognizant of some of these institutional inequities. And so we are looking for community organizations that can talk about the relationships they have with the community, right? And the ways that they offer value in a way that a big institution might not be able to. So in that sense, there's a lots of metrics in place that aren't just the typical metrics, does this fit into this neat little pattern of what we think a strong grant application is. And we're looking for other metrics of success and value about the organization. I hope that helped.
Yeah, for sure. I think you'll probably agree, like need. There's always a discussion of need amongst review panelists, and sometimes it can get pretty contentious, but everyone's very cognizant that.
And Becca, is it okay to say that sometimes we around the table, we look at the list and like, okay, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Let's think critically about what we're doing. And so there's a lot of discussion in these. They're not something that people take lightly. It's something that people dedicate time in terms of reading the applications very thoroughly. So I want you to know that your time that you're putting into this is justified because there's time that we spend. I read each application at least twice, and then it's read again in the context of the actual review meeting. So in that sense, we think critically and think about the issues around power and access, because that at the end of the day, that's what the program is designed to do, is open up access.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Kim.
This was fun.
It was great to see you.
Is it okay if I drop off now?
Yeah.
I have a high schooler coming home and the dogs are going to start barking, and you don't need to hear all that. Listen, everyone, good luck. I'm looking forward to really great news at some point for many of you. This has been a really wonderful experience. If you want to get in touch with me about things that Code of Black is doing, Google me and you'll be able to find me easily. All right. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gallen. That was really just a perfect intro to, yes, the next part of this session. So as Dr. Gallen so eloquently stated before she left the call, these grants really are about access, and what you're writing is a narrative and making a case for you to get resources to help you make something accessible. So we're going to talk about hopefully what I think are some solid takeaways that folks can consider when you are looking at these issues around staffing and outcomes and responsibility. So just to give you the overview, some takeaways from this session are going to be some shared frameworks for thinking about creating equitable labor models. Some questions to ask for points of advocacy, either within your organization or among the external partners you're working with. And then some concrete tools that can help you think through what these sustainable outcomes are going to be. Because yes, this is also the case. Everybody wants to digitize. In some cases, there's a redundancy sometimes of materials. So really thinking through, how you have prioritized the collections that you are saying you wish to make accessible and why. If there's existing or similar content out there, what is it that's truly unique about this project that ensures it will last and not just be another website that people stop maintaining 3 years after the grant finishes. So we're gonna jump in here, and there will be breaks and time for questions, time to also think through the applications that you already have. So we'll build those in. So just to start, I believe that job creation is one of I say it's hard, but it's like a joyful hard. One of the hardest and most intentional parts of this work, besides figuring out what exactly you are trying to pay for. Just a brief background, yes, for myself. I have worked on clear grants before. I've functioned as a peer reviewer before for other types of grants. And in my current position now, I'm working with the Chicago Public Library Foundation, and we have two sort of side foundations that also help raise funds for certain things we have to do. So I am probably at this point in my career writing on or working on more concurrent grant projects than I ever have in my life, and trying to figure out how that does fit with the staffing that's on site. CPL is a union shop too, so always thinking through what is a grant project look like if union staff and the staff that we have in the division are supervising this work, and what are we doing that, what conditions are we creating that are equitable and match whatever benefits, or could even go beyond benefits that are full-time staff, or at least CPL staff as union members do receive. So that's one of the frameworks, or I guess I could say that's the background from which I come at this, and the frameworks that I'm sort of sharing with you now. So first framework, because what we really want to encourage and support you to do here is to make an argument for, not just for a job. This proposal is about an argument for a job, but also how to advocate for a better type of job, a better type of condition. Not just for this work, for the collections, for the workers, and also for our users who will ultimately access this information, and ideally use it to learn or encourage some new type of world building. And that's what we're also talking about when we are wanting you to think about sustainability. So before the pandemic started, I had the opportunity to serve as a co-investigator for a really great project called Collective Responsibility. So we got to survey gallery, library, archives, and museum workers who have worked on digital projects before, digitization projects before. We did this, number one, to reveal working conditions, but also then help create guidelines for grant applicants and institutions on how to create these job descriptions and labor models for projects that should mitigate inequity, exploitation, and precarity throughout the industry. Like long-term, the work this work, this profession can't sustain itself if we're not providing people a living wage to do the work. My understanding was that from your previous sessions, Alana Meyer talked the other day about setting a baseline perhaps for $65,000 is like a minimum wage baseline. So I actually think that's really great that this has come up, but it is thinking through those long-term implications. What do we pay people to do this work, whether it's in a grant position or a full-time position? If we cannot provide that living wage, the work itself becomes sustainable because the profession will simply continue to stratify, like so many other fields where we're just replicating inequity or existing inequalities. So the other thing, the other sort of framework that I use, so I'll say that's the first framework, just thinking through, I like to go back to the results of that survey. You know, if I am thinking through a grant project, what's the scope of work? What's fair? What are we asking people to do? Another framework that is somewhat useful to me, and that might be useful to you as you are thinking through what the job application process looks like on the other end, the types of candidates you will see. There's a great article called Soliciting Performance, Soliciting Bias by Angela Gallen, who I wish that I could remember the year. I'm very sorry. I don't have the year. I will drop the piece in the chat. But they talk about how using critical race and gender studies theory can help you unpack how job descriptions and the interview process does sometimes replicate existing inequalities or overlapping oppressions on your applicants. So it's something that I go back to when I'm creating those job descriptions, because I also am thinking, is what I have written in this job description going to alienate someone coming through the door? Am I asking someone to make a performance out of their identity or their lived experience for the purposes of coming into this work? Or can I think about this process as I'm writing through this job description and what we're asking people to do, so that you're also creating an environment when people walk through the door, the minute they pick up the phone for the interview that you will, I hope, eventually have before you hire someone for this grant project, thinking about what that experience is like for them as well. Because yes, we have needs, but we are also communicating these needs to real life humans who have a whole lot going on. So we want to be as fair as we can about that process. And then a third framework, or just a third avenue that I personally like to explore, that might be very useful for you, is look into knowledge production created by workers in the field who know what the day-to-day needs are. So for instance, if you're applying for a museum related grant, and I think this is especially for grants that might be working with researchers, or like a faculty member or a department, or folks who might not in their day-to-day do library archival, or museum related work. Consulting scholarly work, or even gray literature, and by gray lit, I mean like blogs or social media or newsletters or things like that, where people who work in the industry are choosing to be candid about the material conditions in the field. That's really important while you're creating these job descriptions, so that when you are considering the exact scope of labor you want done, you're basing it on real world data and outcomes, not things that are abstracted from or exist in like a real world ideal space. So I know that's a lot of information just to kind of start from where we are with some of those takeaways. So it looks like we have a 5-minute break in here. Let everybody grab water, do what you have to do. And then we will come back and jump into the three areas to consider. And we'll take pauses in between. You all will have the opportunity to take a look at your application materials as they are and think through some of the questions that we're asking. And we'll have time for your questions in between. Thanks, Joy. Yes, we'll be back at, it's 1:45 my time, 2:50 Eastern time.
Okay. Oh, baby girl. Mm.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. It is 2:50 Eastern time, 1:50 my time. So let's see what we can do here. Get started back. Okay, so I'm breaking down, we have about 30 minutes to go through this next series of, or the next series of information here that I'd like to share. Breaking it down into 3 sections. So we're going to discuss first staffing, then mentorship, and then what I like to call person-first advocacy as guides to helping you pull together good and equitable staffing models, equitable scope of work, etc. So starting with staffing. You all probably have your applications somewhere close by. So as you're taking a look, when you're looking and thinking about questions of staffing, and ideally using some of these frameworks we talked about before the break, ask yourself following questions. Can the scope of work be reasonably broken down into like a 6 or 7 hour a day period? So really thinking through what is the full scope of work. If you are saying there's 10,000, of some object that needs to be digitized, for instance, is it reasonable? Is the job that you have created and the scope of this grant project, will it allow the person in this role, for instance, to do the work, but have time for vacations, have time for holidays, have time for if they actually get sick and are, for whatever reason, unable to perform the work for a period of time. Some of us who worked on grant projects, especially over the past 18 months, understood that for certain labor purposes, we had to make up all new COVID mitigation policies, essentially. So what that looked like, for instance, at CPL was we had the vendor conducting the digitization. They came on site to the library instead of us sending collections out. And then that person was given their own room in it was basically a meeting room that folks weren't really using, so that person could work in a COVID safe environment, but that the staff also felt like, they too were safe, with someone who they didn't necessarily know or, didn't know anything about their health status. So thinking through things like that. Does the scope of work allow for those very necessary breaks that will happen? People will get sick even if we weren't in a pandemic, like people get colds and things like that in a 3-year period. Does your plan assume that they are literally working just every day, 5 days a week through the course of this grant with no time off? If that's the case, then do walk that back. Another thing to think about. So whatever organization or institution you're with, there is a mission and vision that exists. Does the job that you've written reflect that mission and vision, or reflect who your organization says that it is? Does the job reflect that in scope? And if not, do you, in your lane of work, whatever it is you do you personally, as someone helping write this grant, have either the situational, representational, or collective power to bridge any gaps between your institution's word and deed? So maybe your institution is like, hey, we really, care, but for a fact that your institution laid off a lot of people, and many of them were disproportionately people of color. Is there something about the way that the job is written that helps the work you're doing meet the actual word and mission and vision of the organization? Does it really reflect the best and truest principles of what you're trying to accomplish? Thinking too, is the job that you've created written in a way that also respects how labor is currently divided in your organization? Have you considered any power dynamics with respect to how this labor might be done that has any racialized, genderized, or ableist aspects in the work? Are you, and I say we, actually here I would say, are we because it's something I personally ask myself anytime I'm sitting down writing a grant or sitting down with partners writing a grant. Is there anything in this job description that replicates existing harms? So sometimes we'll sit down and we'll write a job description, we'll ask HR, we'll say, okay, what did this last job ad look like? I just want to see it. And then I'll take this template and I'll write up what we need for this digitization project. Well, yes, that is simple enough to do, but in doing that, constantly be asking yourself, is this structured in a way that's going to replicate any existing harms or inequalities that are currently part of my institution? Am I creating a situation that's unsustainable, either for these collections or for a broader experience of work for people who, are in your institution, especially in that category of work? Those are things that I think can be really meaningful to do what Dr. Gallen said to do, which is to reimagine what it means by something being hidden, reimagine the means by which that labor is happening. And again, you're asking these questions because these might be areas in which you could push back. If, for instance, you were going to partner with a large institution that is in a state where wages are somewhat depressed, like maybe you are trying to launch a grant in a right to work state. So that the institution you work at does have salaries that are way below the average. Do you have the opportunity in this grant, for instance, to perhaps consider making the smaller external nonprofit partner the main or lead PI on that grant, because perhaps that institution actually has the wiggle room in their HR policies to create something that doesn't replicate existing harms that might be at your institution. They might be able to conceive of a mode of doing work or a way of allowing your staff to really do the work sustainably and in ways that respect who they are as human beings. Maybe that's better done outside of your institution. We also have to be realistic about where we work. Yes, there's always, as Dr. Gallen said, there are institutions that really do have the best of intentions, but not a lot of experience thinking through some of these underlying issues and these power dynamics. So you have an opportunity to think this through and really layer in from top to bottom staffing. So it's almost 2, and I think keeping us on task here, I would love to give you all, it's about 5 minutes, so it's 1:58. Give you all 5 minutes to kind of individually look at your applications and where you have written your job description. So just start thinking, did I ask these questions? Have I really considered what the mission and vision is? Are we top to bottom in word and deed, or are there areas for growth? So I'll give you all a minute, and then I will check the chat. And when we come back, I will take a few moments to answer some questions. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we stopped at staffing. There was a great question in the chat and I only saw one. So if anything else has come in, we can also address that like at the end of this section. So someone asked, can we talk about student labor? I will take a minute to talk about student labor. It's definitely something that has been at the foremost of much of my archives career. And I was a student worker. My program was full of student work experiences. What I can say is that I always think that there are really meaningful ways to bring student workers into an organization and give them opportunities to actually learn things. I can talk about that actually moving into the second point around mentorship, because that is the second topic here. So pulling back, mentorship questions, again, if you're applying the framework we talked about early on before the break, and you are looking to think things through critically and think about creating equitable conditions for work to get done, things that are really good to consider. Is the mentor an appropriate person? Is whomever you have designated? Well, first of all, even looking at your project should have a mentor. You're asking someone to come in and perform labor for a temporary period of time. They will have to search for a job the entire time that they are also doing work for you at potentially up to 40 hours a week. That is stressful. Anybody who has searched for a job knows that's stressful. So what does this look like? What benefits are we offering to the person whom you want in this role? So your project should have an aspect of mentorship. For a temporary position, you should really be thinking about what's value added here. Is the mentor appropriate? Is the mentor the same person as the supervisor? If you're thinking critically about power dynamics, those two people probably should not be the same. What professional development opportunities will be offered to the person who gets this position? This is temporary. Again, can they leave this experience? Have you given them enough either material or intangible opportunities or experiences that they could obtain permanent employment, either with your institution at the end of the grant period, or within the field or within the given scope of work that you have given them experience to do. Mentoring is different from the sort of management aspects of the job, but a mentor might be asking the person you've hired, where do you see yourself going, beyond this position? A mentor is really supposed to be that person on the project who helps lay the groundwork on the opposite end so that your person isn't just stuck in a series of rotating precarious jobs. So that means, again, you're thinking back about the job description, the scope of work. Will folks have networking opportunities? So will they be able to attend? If we're talking about students, and assuming that there isn't, super privileged information that they're not allowed to know, I don't see any reason why a student worker wouldn't be allowed to attend a department meeting. I know some institutions do have really strict rules about a grant worker's ability to, say, serve on an internal committee over a period of time. That's actually really limiting for their opportunities outside of that grant period. So quite honestly, can you think about structuring that, the job description or the ask in your grant to say, we expect that X number of hours will actually be spent, getting to know people in the field or getting to know people in the industry or attending a department meeting so that this person gets a sense of how the work is done administratively from top to bottom and how it's organized, or that those folks have meaningful opportunities to do something related to project management or share their experiences in a broader forum, maybe in a scholarly way, or maybe it's just in this sort of professional way so that you are sharing work has been done, you are making that person and their work visible and helping them secure employment on the other side. When I talk about intangibles, great example, Kima Jones, who is the former head of Jack Johnson Literary Agency in California. So a couple of years, this was maybe even a year or so before the pandemic. She talked about taking on editorial assistants because she was essentially a small business owner who had started freelancing, but became successful enough to actually hire staff. And her staff tended to be young, or they were in, like MFA programs for creative writing. So she said she liked to think through what types of benefits would have been useful to her as a young creative in a city like LA. So not just that you are thinking through cost of living and things like that, but intangibles for her particular career. Young creative, you're on the writing scene. So she made sure that her editorial assistants had free transit passes. She paid for their transit passes. She also got them, like, I think 1 or 2 year memberships to a couple of art museums that were in the area, because she said she felt like what was really generative for her as a writer was being able to access spaces where art was being created and shown to help generate the process. So if we're thinking through some of those intangibles for someone in a digitization job, and it is a glam job, could you offer them, a free membership to the institution, or a free membership to a similar cultural heritage institution that will, help them network, help them see what's out there, and continue to do the things behind the scenes that help people get what they need. And yeah, thinking through these ideas, going beyond that. The third step in that is you've got staffing, you've got mentoring, and then the third step there is really thinking about this people first idea. So, scope of work, yes, that's all in staffing, everything you expect this person to do, the annual reports that will need to be written when you get the money, etc. But now, who is this person who is coming into your organization to do this work? Can they live? Have you simply written a job description where these people can live in your town? You live in your town, you know how much it costs to live in your town. Are you asking someone to live in your town on less money than you make living in your town? And with it, like, is that, that's not reasonable. I'm not going to say, is that reasonable? Like, that's a reasonable question. No, it is not reasonable, especially those of us who live in bigger cities know, what it costs to live here, to eat here, to pay, to pay for childcare in places like this. You all know what it is. Housing, all of these things. Are you looking at, so for person first, are you looking at, things like race and gender and how those things play into an applicant's safety? If a hidden collections proposal, if we're focusing disproportionately on communities of color, are you asking them to come to your institution, which might be in a place where, are you asking people to come be the diversity in your space, knowing that there's little community to support them locally on or off the job? People will not live at your job during this grant period. They will come in, they will work for about 7 or 8 hours, and then they have to go live in your community. Are the people you are asking, are they going to be able to live in your community in safety? And is there support for them? That's critical. How people experience the world outside of your job plays a really big role in how they show up to that work every day. So just really thinking through that day-to-day process. You go to your job every day. What are the things that are frustrating? Think about the things that are frustrating for you getting to your job or getting to your organization or where you work in the city. If those things are complex for you, understand that they will be 10 times as complex for someone who's taking a temporary position. Maybe they are not even from that location. So also please be thinking relocation fees, that's critical. If you are in fact trying to open up a position to people who are outside of your area, but then thinking through very much, are there people or communities here that can support folks who might be very different from, the primary folks who live in your town or who live in your community? Will those people be happy when they have left and they are not sitting in your space digitizing stuff, at 7 o'clock on a Friday night? What is the life that your candidate can expect to have with all of the resources that you are thinking that you will provide them over this period of time? So lots of questions in there. I would like to check the chat for a minute. But I also think I know we have till 2:30, so it's 2:16, and I would love to just take the rest of that time for questions if we have them. So yes.
Yeah, I think that we can feed them, Stacy, because we've been tracking them to save you a little bit of scrolling.
Okay, that's fantastic. Then let's go. Let's maximize this time.
So one of the first questions that we had was, will CLEAR accept and understand a substantial increase in the total requested funds from the initial application to the final application if the reasons are explained well? National average based competitive wages, along with the need for an additional job position in the project, has become increasingly evident as being necessary during these helpful webinars and while working on updating our final application. But I am worried that the final application will be seen as too different from the initial one. How concerned should I be about this?
Very great question. And so if we go back to what Dr. Gallen said earlier in the conversation about, materials that really helped. If, for instance, so another tool that I am going to shout out here is the Digital Library Federation Digitization Calculator, which I know Becca is very familiar. So if you have a tool like that, for instance, I think if you were to go back in that second application and you included that you use this tool, because the one thing that the tool is really great about is adding in what the cost of living is for your area. So allow you to have a more accurate estimation of how much it would cost to have a person in a role. So if you're using a tool like that, and you have added that as your, as one of your links or citations to support this grant, then that is the support. It has not been my experience that CLEAR looks down badly upon that, but it is more of a question of saying, upon further review, we determined that actually this position, and based on the math that we did, we've determined that this position actually needs a much higher rate of pay.
Yeah, and just as a reassurance, we've been fielding this question a lot from people sending emails to us. So understand that this is a shift that historically we've seen in this program, that as you work to refine your estimates, as you work to solidify your partnerships, the budget is one of those things that's going to change. I mean, it's just expected as you refine your project goals. So do what you need to do, apply what you've learned, and just use that space that we've given you to explain the shifts that you've made.
Other questions?
I feel the next question is, we have a lot of volunteers that we are missing and have not been able to make contributions during the period of closures due to COVID. In our initial application, we suggested that digitization would set us up for future work on making transcriptions for AV materials, but didn't include transcriptions as part of the project work. We had the idea that we could mobilize our volunteers to make first drafts of transcriptions as an in-kind contribution to the project's overall outputs. This could, however, be paid work. Do you think the idea is fair?
So again, my context, I'm in a union shop, so it's not that I have not worked before with volunteers who have come in and done great work. It's just that the challenge with volunteers is that they cannot be necessarily forced into doing anything. So, and for transcriptions, quite honestly, that's labor that I would argue you build into the grant and you say it's necessary because ADA, quite honestly, there's a Supreme Court ADA ruling that requires that. If you are putting something up online and there's an audio component, it has to be transcribed. You have to be providing that, or your project is actually at risk of getting sued. Check the ruling. It's, what is it? Robles versus Domino's. An individual was visually impaired and the ruling came down that if you are a business or an organization and you are making information available on your site, that it has to be ADA compliant. So I would actually argue that there's a case in there for building in transcription as a necessary and sustainable practice for this project so that the material can really be accessed down the line. And that it needs to be, pay a vendor and look at, maybe what you're saying is we're valuing labor on this project across the board. So we're asking for X amount of money so that we can fairly pay a vendor to get this done right. Not, we're not putting it on unpaid labor, but we are going to ask that a professional take care of this and do it so that the project has full sustainability. Other questions piping up through the chat?
Yeah, next question is, I understand the need to promote good paying jobs and support that effort. However, if the higher salaries recommended create a problem with internal equity in our local class or comp system, is it possible to raise the salaries of a current staff person and add that increase to the grant?
I mean, so this is where I would say, yes, you are thinking through whoever you are in your capacity. If you have that situational power to advocate for that, get HR on the phone, see what it can do. I mean, yes, there are always these modes that can shift. And I do truly believe that a rising tide can lift all boats. If we are setting a baseline value for this work that is of a living wage and that allows people to, do the work that needs to be done to really maintain our cultural heritage, I think sometimes you just have to go for it. We've been trapped in very specific labor models for a long time. And it does feel like now's a good time to really imagine, how could this look different? How can we create different conditions for this work?
Yeah, and I'll add that the staff person who you're thinking of bringing up would need to be involved in the project, and you would write those funds into the grant. But that would certainly be possible if you were, bringing in an existing archivist to contribute to the project.
Other questions, thoughts? Oh, you might be muted, Sharon.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for writing a competitive grant where an existing staff member will be the grant funded worker?
So that's an interesting question, like an existing staff member and it's not considered a cost share on the project? I'll be honest and say I haven't necessarily had experience with that particular scenario. I would honestly have to think about that. I think based on whatever that practice looks like in the organization, it's my understanding that CLEAR does want, if you're the main institution involved, that there's a cost share element. And sometimes that cost share is like, oh, well, we've paid for the digital platform on which this project will live, or yes, we are going to allot, X percentage of like the cataloging librarian's time so that metadata on this project is updated and we know that we have that. Yes, it's usually written as X percentage. And that cost share can look like a lot of different things. If someone is currently employed at your organization though, yeah, I think that it has to be looked at as a cost share. It's not necessarily that that person is receiving cash funds and they're also like full-time employed in your org.
Yeah, we can speak to this a little bit because we see it in a lot of applications. If you're asking for the grant to cover a percentage of the salary, you're going to need to explain why, as a fully employed person at your organization, you need these award funds to cover those costs, and how that individual's responsibilities will then be covered by the organization so that they can take on this project. Now, I saw in the chat too that there was maybe some clarification to this, that these would be current staff that are funded by a grant now, and the idea is that they would then jump to this grant, and you would need to explain that also. I will caution that our reviewers may push back and say that your organization at this stage should be covering these staff members if what they're trying to do is jump from grant to grant. That's a sustainability question. So you're going to need to really provide strong justification for why this is the current funding model for staff that have now, I'm guessing, been at your organization for a while. So we do have a couple more questions, and we only have 3 minutes left. I don't know, Stacy, if you have, and like, if you need to jump off right at 3:30.
I apologize. I do unfortunately have a hard stop at 2:30, but you know, maybe one final thing I could just leave you all with is that I think that, yes, while the grant process, it is really hard. And I have definitely done it. This is the first time I've done it with an organization where I do not feel as though I've been doing it last minute, like 48 hours before it's due. So that is really, really great. I'm very fortunate to be in an organization that has essentially a grant writing arm. That said, I think it's a really exciting time for you all to be working on projects like this and thinking innovatively and creatively about labor and work and what it looks like. Like, yes, shoot for the moon on some real, like, sustainable business. And just think again, put the people first. If your people are in a good place, the work is more than likely to be good as well. So good luck, everyone. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Becca, for inviting me to do this. I wish everyone good luck. I did get to see, like, there's some awesome proposals out there in the wind. So good luck to all of you. And yes, if I can be of any further assistance, I'm pretty sure my contact information is on the Chicago Public Library website.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stacy. And we will let you go and go ahead and put
Well, we
one
have a
last
few,
slide to wrap up.
yeah, we have a couple more reminders for everybody else before you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Awesome. And my slides just disappeared. So Joy, if you want to go ahead with those.
Yes, I can do that. As we have been doing in all of these sessions, we're gonna pop up a quick poll to end this to see how you feel at this stage. And as you think about responding to that, we also just want to make sure you know that we will answer the few remaining questions that were posed that we didn't get to, and those will all be in our Q&A document that we'll share alongside the recording and slides and everything as we've done in the past. We also want to make sure if you're able and willing to fill out our survey. We are collecting those, and we really do appreciate the responses that you have. So we're seeing that folks are still somewhat prepared, maybe re-listening and really absorbing the lessons that we heard from Kim and Stacy today will help. It was a lot, and I know that some of these are big challenges for a lot of organizations. We want to remind you that our last session that we're going to have together is going to be a Q&A with us, your grants team. You supply the questions, we will supply the answers, and that is going to be the content of our last session together before you really hit those last few weeks as you prepare your final applications. As always, we're just so grateful for your time together. We're very grateful to Kim and Stacy. It was a pleasure for us to hear from them, and I hope that it was beneficial to you as well. We always invite you to email us at hiddencollections@clear.org. Take advantage of being in touch if you have any questions, big or small, many questions all in one, or a series of questions as they come to mind. We will answer them all for you. And as a reminder, the final submission deadline is November 19th. So we know that date is quickly approaching. We just wish you the best this afternoon, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.